Some promises are meant to be kept, no matter the cost. When a dying man asks a hospital orderly to find the woman he abandoned 47 years ago, it seems like an impossible request. But Marcus Chin isn't the type to walk away from someone's last wish. What begins as a simple search through faded photographs and forgotten memories becomes a race against time. A desperate attempt to bridge decades of silence, regret, and unspoken words before it's too late. Across the country, Sarah Mitchell has built a life far from the heartbreak that once shattered her world. She never imagined that a single letter would arrive on an ordinary afternoon, carrying with it the weight of a love she thought she'd buried forever. Now she faces an impossible choice. Should she grant forgiveness to the man who destroyed her, or let him die carrying the burden of his mistakes? This is a story about the choices that haunt us, the love that refuses to fade, and the courage it takes to seek redemption when time has almost run out. If you believe in second chances and the power of forgiveness, follow our channel for more stories that touch the heart. Like this video and comment below where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. The fluorescent lights of St. Margaret's Hospital cast harsh shadows across the linoleum floor as Marcus Chun made his way down the corridor toward room 347. His sneakers squeaked against the polished surface, a sound that had become oddly comforting during his 3 years working as a night orderly. At 28, Marcus had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the graveyard shift, the hushed conversations, the occasional emergency, and the quiet dignity of patients facing their final hours. Room 347 belonged to Mr. Edward Harrison, an elderly man who had been admitted 2 weeks ago with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim, and everyone knew it. Marcus had developed a soft spot for the old man, who despite his pain, always managed a gentle smile and a word of gratitude whenever Marcus checked on him. Tonight felt different. As Marcus approached the room, he noticed the door was slightly ajar, and a soft amber glow spilled into the hallway. Mr. Harrison rarely kept his light on this late. Marcus knocked gently before entering. "Mr. Harrison? Everything all right in here?" The old man was sitting up in bed, his thin frame propped against several pillows. His weathered face bore the unmistakable marks of a life fully lived. Deep laugh lines around his eyes, a strong jawline that age had softened but not diminished. His once full head of hair had thinned to wisps of silver, yet his eyes retained a remarkable clarity, sharp and focused despite the morphine drip attached to his arm. "Marcus," Edward said, his voice raspy but warm. "I was hoping you'd come by. Please sit down. I need to ask you something important." Marcus pulled up the vinyl chair beside the bed, concern etching across his features. "Of course. What do you need? Are you in pain? Should I call the nurse?" Edward waved his hand dismissively, though the gesture clearly cost him energy. No. The pain is manageable. What I need is something the nurses can't provide." He paused, taking a labored breath. "I need your help with a promise." Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. "A promise? I'm dying, Marcus. We both know it. The doctors give me days, maybe a week at most." Edward's voice was matter-of-fact, without self-pity. "I've made my peace with that. But there's something I must do before I go, and I can't do it alone." The old man reached toward his bedside table, his hand trembling slightly as he grasped a worn leather wallet. From it, he extracted a small, creased photograph and held it out to Marcus. Marcus took the photo carefully, as if it might disintegrate in his hands. The image showed a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with striking features, dark hair pulled back from her face, intelligent eyes that seemed to look directly through the camera, and a reserved smile that suggested both strength and vulnerability. She wore what appeared to be a nurse's uniform from several decades ago. "Her name is Sarah," Edward said softly. "Sarah Mitchell. That photo was taken 47 years ago, in 1978, at a hospital not unlike this one. She was a nurse. I was a young doctor doing my residency. We fell in love." His eyes grew distant, lost in memory. "It was the kind of love that consumes you completely, that makes you believe anything is possible." Marcus studied the photograph more closely, noting the quality of the old Kodak print, the slightly faded colors that spoke of years tucked away in darkness. "We were going to get married," Edward continued. "I had the ring, had planned the proposal for her birthday. But then," his voice caught, and he took a moment to compose himself. "Then I made the worst mistake of my life. I let ambition blind me to what truly mattered." The old man's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I was offered a position at Johns Hopkins, a dream opportunity, a chance to study under the best cardiac surgeons in the country. But Sarah had family here, aging parents who needed her. I told her we could make it work long distance, that it was just for a year or two. She asked me to stay, to find another way. I refused. Marcus remained silent, sensing that Edward needed to tell this story without interruption, that these words had been waiting decades to be spoken. I left for Baltimore in September of 1978. I told myself I was being practical, building a future for us. But the truth was, I was being selfish. I chose my career over her, over us. She stopped returning my calls after the first month. I told myself she'd come around, that she'd see I was doing this for both of us. Edward's voice cracked. By the time I realized how wrong I was, by the time I came back to try to make things right, she was gone. Gone? Marcus asked gently. Moved away. Her parents had both passed, and there was nothing keeping her here anymore. I searched for her, Marcus. For months, I searched. But this was before the internet, before social media made everyone easy to find. She had vanished completely, and I had no one to blame but myself. Edward closed his eyes, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. I went on to have a successful career. I married someone else, had children, built what looked like a good life from the outside. But there was always this hollow space inside me, this knowledge that I had let go of something precious and irreplaceable. My wife passed 5 years ago. My children are scattered across the country with their own lives. And now, at the end, all I can think about is Sarah and the apology I never got to give her. Marcus carefully set the photograph on the bedside table. Mr. Harrison, what exactly are you asking me to do? The old man's eyes opened, meeting Marcus's gaze with unexpected intensity. Fight her for me, please. Use whatever tools you young people have these days, the internet, those social media sites. I have information that might help. He gestured weakly toward a manila envelope on the table. Her full name, her parents' names, the hospital where we worked. Find her, and if she's willing, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her that not a day has gone by when I haven't regretted my choice. Tell her that she was the love of my life, and that I died knowing I had been a fool to let her go. Marcus felt the weight of the request settle over him. This wasn't a simple errand or a minor favor. This was a dying man's desperate attempt at redemption, a final chance to right an old wrong. I don't have much time left, Edward whispered. The doctors don't say it outright, but I can feel it. My body is shutting down. Please, Marcus, help me do this one last thing. Let me leave this world having at least tried to make amends. Marcus looked at the photograph again, at the young woman frozen in time, forever in her 20s, forever smiling that reserved smile. Somewhere out there, she was now in her 70s, perhaps with her own family, her own life story that had continued on without Edward Harrison. Would she even want to hear from him after all these years? Would this message bring her peace or simply reopen old wounds? But looking at the desperate hope in Edward's fading eyes, Marcus knew he couldn't refuse. Some debts could never be repaid, some mistakes never fully corrected, but that didn't mean the attempt wasn't worth making. I'll try, Marcus said finally. I can't promise I'll find her, and I can't promise she'll want to hear your message. But I'll try. Edward's face transformed with relief, so profound it seemed to momentarily erase the pain etched into his features. His thin hand reached out and grasped Marcus's with surprising strength. Thank you, he breathed. Thank you, Marcus. That's all I can ask for. Just the chance. Marcus's shift ended at 7 in the morning, but sleep was impossible. He sat at the small desk in his studio apartment, the manila envelope Edward had given him spread open before him. The early morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting striped shadows across the scattered documents, a testament to one man's desperate attempt to preserve memories he thought he'd lost forever. The contents were meticulously organized, revealing Edward's methodical nature even in matters of the heart. There were several pages of handwritten notes on yellow legal paper, the ink slightly faded but still legible. Edward's penmanship was precise, almost surgical in its clarity, fitting for a doctor. Marcus began reading through the information, his tired eyes straining to absorb every detail. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell. Born March 15, 1956, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Parents, Robert and Eleanor Mitchell, both deceased as of 1978. Last known address, 2847 Maple Street, Apartment 4B. Last known employer, St. Catherine's Medical Center, Philadelphia. Education, University of Pennsylvania, School of Nursing, graduated 1977. No known siblings. Height approximately 5 feet 6 inches, dark brown hair, hazel eyes. Distinguishing features: small scar on right hand from childhood accident. Always wore a silver cross necklace given by her grandmother. Marcus marveled at the level of detail Edward had retained after nearly 5 decades. These weren't just facts, they were treasured memories, small observations that spoke of intimate knowledge and deep affection. The silver cross necklace, the scar on her hand, these were the details a person only noticed when they truly paid attention, when they looked at someone with love. Beneath the handwritten notes were several additional photographs, each one carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. Marcus examined them one by one, watching Sarah Mitchell's story unfold through frozen moments in time. There was Sarah at what appeared to be a hospital picnic, laughing with colleagues, her head thrown back in genuine joy. Another showed her in a more formal setting, receiving what looked like an award or commendation, her expression proud but modest. A third captured an unguarded moment, Sarah sitting on a bench outside the hospital, reading a book, completely absorbed in the pages before her, the afternoon sun creating a halo effect around her dark hair. In each photograph, Marcus could see what had captivated Edward. There was something magnetic about Sarah Mitchell, something that transcended the mere physical beauty captured by the camera. It was in the intelligence of her gaze, the kindness evident in her interactions with others, the quiet confidence in her posture. She was someone who commanded attention without demanding it, who drew people in through authenticity rather than artifice. Marcus turned to his laptop, the device humming to life with a familiar electronic buzz. He opened multiple browser tabs, preparing for what he knew would be an exhaustive search. Finding someone after 47 years wouldn't be easy, especially someone who had deliberately disappeared. Sarah Mitchell could have married and changed her name, the most obvious complication. She could have moved across the country, or even left the United States entirely. She might not even be alive anymore, though Marcus pushed that thought away. Edward needed hope, not harsh realities, at least not yet. He started with the basics, typing Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell into Google, followed by Philadelphia and nurse. The search returned thousands of results, too many Sarah Mitchells, too much noise obscuring any potential signal. He tried adding her birth year, then her parents' names, then the name of the hospital where she'd worked. Each search refined the results slightly, but still yielded nothing concrete. Marcus moved to Facebook, creating search parameters based on age, location, and profession. He scrolled through dozens of profiles, examining profile pictures with forensic attention, looking for hazel eyes, dark hair now turned gray, facial features that might have aged from the young woman in Edward's photographs. Some profiles were private, showing only name and location. Others displayed full galleries of family photos, grandchildren, vacation snapshots, entire lives lived and documented in the digital age. None of them were his Sarah Mitchell. He tried LinkedIn next, searching for nursing professionals of the right age, who might have worked in Philadelphia in the late 1970s. Several promising leads emerged, but each one dead-ended upon closer investigation. Wrong middle name, wrong education history, wrong geographical trajectory. One Sarah Mitchell had indeed worked at St. Catherine's Medical Center, but the dates didn't align. She'd started there in 1985, 7 years after the Sarah he was seeking had left. Instagram, Twitter, even MySpace in case she was an early internet adopter who'd abandoned the platform. Marcus left no digital stone unturned. He searched genealogy websites, hoping to trace her through family trees. He combed through nursing association directories, hospital alumni pages, and professional licensing databases. The Pennsylvania State Board of Nursing had records dating back decades, but privacy restrictions prevented him from accessing detailed information without proper authorization. Hours passed in a blur of screen time and growing frustration. Marcus's eyes burned from staring at the monitor, his back ached from hunching over the keyboard, and his coffee had gone cold in its mug, a film forming on its surface. The sun climbed higher in the sky, his small apartment growing warmer as the day progressed. He should sleep, his body desperately needed rest, but Edward's face haunted him, those pleading eyes, the weight of that dying request. He decided to try a different approach. If Sarah Mitchell had wanted to disappear, she would have covered the obvious tracks. But people left traces in unexpected places. Marcus began searching old newspaper archives, digitized records from Philadelphia publications in the late 1970s and early 1980s. He searched for wedding announcements, birth announcements, obituaries, any public notice that might contain her name. The Philadelphia Inquirer's archives yielded nothing. The daily news the same. He expanded his search to smaller community newspapers, church bulletins, hospital newsletters, anywhere that might have documented the everyday lives of ordinary people. The work was tedious, mind-numbing, but Marcus persisted, driven by a promise and by something else he was only beginning to recognize: a profound respect for Edward's devotion, for the idea that a love could burn so brightly that even 47 years and a terminal diagnosis couldn't extinguish its light. Finally, as afternoon shadows began lengthening across his apartment, Marcus found something. It was a small article in a community newsletter from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, dated June 1980. The piece was about a charity blood drive organized by local nurses. Among the names listed as volunteers was Sarah E. Mitchell, described as a pediatric nurse at Harrisburg General Hospital. Marcus's pulse quickened. Harrisburg was only 2 hours from Philadelphia, close enough to be a realistic relocation, far enough to represent a clean break. And the middle initial matched. The timeline fit too. 2 years after leaving Philadelphia, Sarah had resurfaced in a new city, working in a different specialty. Pediatrics instead of general nursing, perhaps a deliberate choice, a fresh start in a field that would bring her joy rather than painful memories. He refined his search, focusing on Harrisburg from 1980 onward. More hits emerged, painting a clearer picture. A mention in a 1982 hospital annual report listing S. Mitchell among the pediatric nursing staff. A photograph from 1985 showing a group of nurses at a children's charity event. One woman in the back row could have been Sarah, though the image quality was too poor to be certain. A 1987 article about a Nursing Excellence Award. Recipient's name: Sarah Mitchell, Pediatric Intensive Care Unit. The trail went cold after the late 1980s, as if Sarah had either moved again or simply faded from public record in the years before everything became digitized. But Marcus now had a new starting point, a confirmed location where Sarah had spent at least several years of her life. It wasn't much, but it was more than he'd had this morning. He reached for his phone, hesitating before dialing. Harrisburg General Hospital would have employee records, but privacy laws would prevent them from sharing information about former staff members, especially to a random stranger calling from Philadelphia. He needed a different strategy, something more personal and less bureaucratic. Marcus thought for a moment, then opened a new browser window and searched for nursing associations and retirement communities in the Harrisburg area. If Sarah had worked there for any length of time, she might have formed lasting friendships, joined professional organizations, or stayed in the region after retiring. People who worked in pediatrics tended to be deeply connected to their communities, invested in the lives of the children they'd cared for. He found a Facebook group called Harrisburg Hospital Nurses, Past and Present, a community page with over 800 members. Marcus created a carefully worded post, knowing he had to balance honesty with discretion. Looking for information about a nurse named Sarah Mitchell who worked at Harrisburg General Hospital, likely in the pediatric unit during the 1980s. Trying to help reunite an old friend from her Philadelphia nursing days. Any information would be greatly appreciated. This is regarding an urgent matter. A former colleague is seriously ill and wishes to reconnect. He hit post, watching the message appear in the group's feed. Almost immediately, his heart sank as he realized the post needed admin approval before becoming visible to the broader membership. The waiting would be torture, every minute precious when Edward's time was measured in days. Marcus glanced at the clock. 3 in the afternoon. He'd been awake for 32 hours straight, running on nothing but coffee, adrenaline, and determination. His body screamed for sleep, but his mind refused to quiet. He returned to the photographs Edward had given him, studying Sarah's face as if it might yield new clues, as if the decades-old images might somehow whisper secrets about where she'd gone and who she'd become. As he stared at the picture of Sarah laughing at the hospital picnic, Marcus felt the full weight of what he'd undertaken. He wasn't just searching for a person, he was attempting to bridge an enormous chasm of time and regret, to carry a message across decades of silence. Would Sarah even want to hear Edward's apology? Would it bring her comfort or simply resurrect pain she'd long since buried? His phone buzzed, a text message from the hospital. His shift started in 4 hours. Marcus set an alarm, finally allowing himself to lie down on his bed. Sleep came quickly, but it was restless, filled with dreams of endless corridors and doors that opened onto empty rooms, of searching for someone who remained always just out of reach. Marcus woke to the insistent buzzing of his alarm, his body protesting the brief respite from consciousness. 3 hours of sleep had done little to ease his exhaustion, but the urgency of his mission overrode any physical complaint. He grabbed his phone before even sitting up, checking for responses to his Facebook post with the desperate hope of someone awaiting life-changing news. His heart leaped. There were 7 notifications from the nursing group, the post having been approved while he slept. Marcus's fingers trembled slightly as he opened the thread, scrolling through the responses with an intensity that made his vision blur at the edges. The first 3 comments were sympathetic but unhelpful, people wishing him luck but unable to provide concrete information. The 4th comment made him pause. I remember a Sarah Mitchell from the pediatric unit in the mid-80s. Sweet woman, excellent with the kids. She left around 1988 or 1989, I think. Someone said she moved out west, but I can't remember where. Out west. The vastness of that description was almost comical. It could mean anywhere from Ohio to California, from the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific coast. Still, it was something, a direction if not a destination. The 5th comment was more promising. Sarah Mitchell. Oh my goodness, I worked with her for 3 years. Wonderful nurse, one of the best I've ever known. She had this way with the children that was almost magical, could calm a screaming toddler with just her voice and presence. I lost touch with her after she moved, but I think she went to Colorado. Denver maybe? Or was it Colorado Springs? I'm sorry, this was over 30 years ago, and my memory isn't what it used to be. Marcus read the comment 3 times, committing every word to memory. Colorado. The specificity of the state was a significant breakthrough, narrowing his search area from the entire United States to a single region. He quickly typed a reply. Thank you so much for this information. Do you remember anything else about why she moved to Colorado, or if she stayed in nursing? While waiting for a response, Marcus began a new search, this time focusing on Sarah Mitchell and Colorado. He cross-referenced nursing licenses, hospital employment records, and public databases specific to the state. The Colorado Board of Nursing had an online verification system for licensed nurses. Marcus entered Sarah's name, selecting parameters for licenses that would have been active in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Several Sarah Mitchells appeared in the results, but only one matched the right age range and had a license issue date of October 1988. The license was listed as active until 2021, when it had been changed to retired status. The registered address was in Boulder, Colorado, a college town nestled against the Rocky Mountains, known for its progressive culture and natural beauty. Boulder. Marcus felt a surge of excitement so powerful it temporarily banished his fatigue. He had found her, or at least found where she had been 3 years ago when she'd retired. Whether she still lived at that address was another question, but it was the most concrete lead he'd discovered in his entire search. He checked his watch. 6:30 in the evening. His shift started in 30 minutes, barely enough time to shower and dress, let alone process this breakthrough. Marcus made a split-second decision, reaching for his phone to call the hospital. He rarely called in sick, his work ethic was too strong, his sense of responsibility too ingrained, but this was exceptional circumstances. Edward didn't have the luxury of time. "This is Marcus Chun," he said when the nursing supervisor answered. "I'm so sorry, but I've come down with something and won't be able to make my shift tonight. I know it's last minute, and I apologize." There was a pause, then a sigh of resignation. "All right, Marcus. Feel better. We'll find coverage." Guilt gnawed at him as he ended the call, but he pushed it aside. He would make it up to them, work extra shifts, whatever was needed. Right now, Edward needed him more than the hospital did. Marcus pulled up Google Maps and entered the Boulder address. The Street View function showed a modest 2-story house painted a warm terracotta color, with a well-maintained garden visible behind a white picket fence. Solar panels adorned the roof, and a hybrid car sat in the driveway. It looked like the home of someone who had found peace, who had built a comfortable life for themselves. Marcus wondered what Sarah's story had been over these past 47 years, what joys and sorrows had shaped the trajectory that led her to this house in Boulder. He needed more confirmation before presenting this information to Edward. Finding the right address was one thing. Confirming it was actually Sarah Mitchell, Edward's Sarah Mitchell, was another. Marcus searched for property records, discovering the house had been purchased in 1995 by Sarah E. Mitchell. The middle initial matched. The timeline fit. Everything aligned. But Marcus wanted more than circumstantial evidence. He needed something definitive, something that would prove beyond doubt that this was the woman Edward had loved and lost. He returned to his social media searches, this time adding Boulder as a location parameter. Nothing appeared under Sarah Mitchell's name. Either she didn't use social media or maintained strict privacy settings. Then Marcus had another idea. He searched for Sarah Mitchell and nursing in Boulder together, looking for any professional associations, community involvement, or public recognition. Several results appeared, including a 2018 article from a local Boulder newspaper about a charity fundraiser for Children's Hospital. The article featured a photograph of several community members presenting a large check. Among them, standing slightly to the side with a humble smile, was a woman identified in the caption as Sarah Mitchell, retired pediatric nurse and event organizer. Marcus enlarged the photograph, his heart pounding as he studied the woman's features. She was in her early 60s in this image, her dark hair now silver gray and cut in a short, elegant style. Time had etched lines around her eyes and mouth, but the essential architecture of her face remained recognizable from Edward's photographs. The same strong cheekbones, the same intelligent gaze, the same reserved smile that suggested both warmth and a careful guarding of vulnerability. It was her. After hours of searching, countless dead ends, and mounting frustration, Marcus had found Sarah Mitchell. He sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he'd accomplished and terrified by what came next. He had located the woman Edward Harrison had spent 47 years regretting he'd lost. Now came the harder part, making contact, delivering a message that would undoubtedly stir up emotions and memories long buried, potentially causing pain to a woman who had built a new life far from the heartbreak of her youth. Marcus looked again at Edward's photographs, at the young couple who had been so in love, whose future had seemed so certain. He thought about the weight of regret, about how a single decision made in youth could echo through an entire lifetime. Edward had chosen ambition over love, and that choice had haunted him for nearly half a century. Did Sarah carry similar regrets, or had she long ago made peace with their parting? Had she found love again, built a family, created a life so full and satisfying that Edward Harrison was merely a footnote in her personal history? There was only one way to find out. Marcus opened a blank document and began composing a letter. Email seemed too impersonal for a message of this magnitude, and a phone call too intrusive and immediate. A physical letter would give Sarah time to process, to decide how, or if she wanted to respond, to maintain control over her emotional reaction. He wrote carefully, weighing each word, drafting and redrafting sentences until they captured the right tone, respectful, sincere, but honest about the urgency of the situation. He explained who he was, how he'd come to know Edward Harrison, and the dying man's desperate wish to make amends. Marcus made clear that he expected nothing from Sarah, that she owed Edward nothing, that this was simply one man's attempt to right an old wrong before leaving this world. Mr. Harrison understands that his apology comes far too late, Marcus wrote. He knows he has no right to ask for your forgiveness or even your acknowledgement. But he wanted you to know that you were loved deeply, that losing you was the greatest mistake of his life, and that not a day has passed when he didn't think of you and wish he had made a different choice. Whatever happened after he left, whatever life you've built, he wants you to know that you deserved better than what he gave you, and he is profoundly sorry. Marcus included his phone number and email address, then read through the letter one final time. It felt inadequate. How could words on paper possibly convey the depth of Edward's remorse or do justice to a love that had persisted across decades of separation? But it was the best he could offer, the most faithful execution of the promise he'd made. He printed the letter on good quality paper, folded it carefully, and placed it in an envelope. Sarah's Boulder address went on the front in his neatest handwriting. He would mail it tomorrow, sending it priority with tracking, so he would know exactly when it arrived. Marcus glanced at the clock. 8:15. Edward would be wondering why he hadn't come by during his shift. The old man was probably lying in his hospital bed, watching the door, hoping for news. Marcus couldn't tell him about Sarah yet, not until he knew whether she would respond, not until there was something concrete to report beyond mere discovery. False hope could be crueler than no hope at all. But he could visit Edward, could at least let him know that progress was being made, that his request was being honored. Marcus grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, the letter to Sarah Mitchell clutched carefully in his hand. Tomorrow it would begin its journey across the country, carrying with it the weight of 47 years of regret and the fragile hope of a dying man seeking redemption. As Marcus drove through the darkening streets toward St. Margaret's Hospital, he found himself thinking about the nature of love and loss, about the choices that define our lives and the alternate paths we can never travel. Edward Harrison had chosen his career, and that choice had cost him everything that truly mattered. Would Sarah Mitchell's response bring him peace, or would it simply be one more reminder of what he'd thrown away? Marcus didn't know, but he had found her, and that in itself felt like a small miracle in a world where people could disappear and time could erase almost everything. Whatever happened next was beyond his control. He had kept his promise, and now the rest was up to fate, circumstance, and a woman in Boulder who had no idea that a ghost from her past was reaching out across the decades, asking for something that might be impossible to give. The hospital corridor was quieter than usual when Marcus arrived, the evening shift settling into its routine rhythm of medication rounds and vital sign checks. He made his way to room 347, his stomach tight with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The letter to Sarah was safely tucked in his jacket pocket, a tangible reminder of the bridge he was attempting to build across decades of silence. Edward's room was dimly lit, the overhead fluorescents turned off in favor of a single bedside lamp that cast a warm, amber glow across the space. The old man appeared to have diminished even in the 24 hours since Marcus had last seen him, his body seeming to sink deeper into the hospital bed, as if gravity itself was pulling him towards some inevitable destination. The morphine drip continued its steady flow, and new monitors had been added, telemetry equipment that tracked his failing heart with electronic precision. Edward's eyes were closed when Marcus entered, his breathing shallow and labored. For a terrifying moment, Marcus thought he'd arrived too late, that the promise he'd made would remain unfulfilled. But then Edward's eyelids fluttered open, and recognition dawned in those fading eyes. "Marcus," Edward whispered, his voice even weaker than before. "You came." Marcus pulled the chair close to the bed, sitting down with careful deliberation. "Of course I came. I told you I'd help, and I meant it." Edward's hand moved slightly on the bedsheet, a gesture that might have been reaching out. Marcus took the frail hand in his own, shocked by how cold and insubstantial it felt, as if Edward was already halfway between worlds. The skin was paper-thin, translucent enough to reveal the network of veins beneath, blue rivers mapping a landscape that was shutting down. "Did you?" Edward paused, gathering strength for the question that clearly meant everything to him. "Did you find anything? Any trace of her?" Marcus felt the weight of the moment settle over him. He could see the desperate hope in Edward's eyes, the need for some small comfort in these final hours. The truth was complicated. He had found Sarah, but he didn't yet know if she would respond, if she would grant Edward the closure he sought. Should he share what he discovered, risking the possibility of disappointed expectations? Or should he wait until he had something definitive to report? Looking at Edward's face, at the naked vulnerability there, Marcus made his decision. Hope, even uncertain hope, was better than despair. "I found her," Marcus said quietly, watching as Edward's entire being seemed to focus on those 3 words. "She's alive, Mr. Harrison. She's living in Boulder, Colorado. She worked as a pediatric nurse for decades before retiring a few years ago. By all accounts, she was exceptional at what she did. People who worked with her still remember her kindness and skill." Edward's eyes filled with tears that spilled down his weathered cheeks, leaving glistening trails in the lamplight. His grip on Marcus's hand tightened with surprising strength, as if he were holding on to a lifeline. "She's alive," he repeated, his voice breaking. "After all these years, she's alive. Tell me more. Please, tell me everything you found." Marcus described his search in detail, knowing that Edward was hungry for every scrap of information, every small detail that would help him picture the life Sarah had lived without him. He told him about her move to Harrisburg, her transition to pediatrics, her eventual relocation to Colorado. He described the photograph from the Boulder newspaper, Sarah at the charity fundraiser, her silver hair and gentle smile, the evidence of a life well lived and dedicated to service. "She looks happy," Marcus said, unsure if this would bring comfort or add another layer to Edward's regret. "The photograph shows someone at peace, someone who found purpose in her work." Edward closed his eyes, fresh tears squeezing from beneath his lids. "Good," he whispered. "That's good. I'm glad she found happiness, even if it wasn't with me. Even if I'm the reason she had to search for it elsewhere." He opened his eyes again, fixing Marcus with an intense gaze. "Did you contact her? Does she know about me, about this?" "I wrote her a letter," Marcus explained, patting his jacket pocket. "I wanted to be respectful, to give her space to process the information before deciding how to respond. I plan to mail it tomorrow morning, with priority delivery. It should reach her in 3 or 4 days." Edward's face fell slightly, and Marcus could see the mental calculation happening behind those tired eyes. 3 or 4 days for delivery. Perhaps another day or two for Sarah to read it, process it, decide how to respond. If she responded at all. The mathematics of time had become cruel. Every day now was precious, potentially Edward's last. "I don't have 3 or 4 days," Edward said, voicing what they both knew. "The doctors told me this morning that my organs are failing faster than expected. They're giving me 48 hours, maybe 72 at the outside." His voice remained steady despite the devastating content of his words, the acceptance of someone who had made peace with mortality, even if not with his past mistakes. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. He had found Sarah, had crafted the perfect message, but the logistics of mail delivery threatened to make it all meaningless. "I could try calling her," he offered. "I can find a phone number, reach out directly." Edward shook his head weakly. "No, I don't want to ambush her with a phone call. That wouldn't be fair. Your letter is the right approach, respectful, giving her control over how and when she responds." He paused, his breathing becoming more labored. "But perhaps you could expedite it somehow. Overnight delivery?" "I'll send it first thing in the morning," Marcus promised. "Overnight express. It will be in her hands by tomorrow afternoon, Boulder time." Edward nodded, seeming to draw comfort from this small acceleration of the timeline. "Thank you, Marcus. You've given me something I didn't think I'd have, the knowledge that she's out there, that she lived a good life. Even if she chooses not to respond, knowing she's alive and well is more than I deserved." They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, Edward's breathing the only sound beyond the soft beeping of monitors and the distant sounds of the hospital beyond the closed door. Marcus found himself studying the old man's face, seeing past the ravages of illness to the young doctor who had fallen so deeply in love, who had made a choice he'd regretted for 47 years. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said finally. "If you could go back, knowing everything you know now, would you still become a doctor? Would you choose a different path entirely?" Edward considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I'd still become a doctor," he said slowly. "Medicine was my calling, my purpose. But I would have done it differently. I would have found a way to build my career without sacrificing love. Johns Hopkins wasn't the only path to becoming a good surgeon. There were other hospitals, other opportunities, other ways to learn and grow that wouldn't have required leaving Sarah." He paused, catching his breath. Young people think they have to choose between personal happiness and professional success, as if the two are mutually exclusive. But that's a false dichotomy. The truth is, real success, the kind that matters, includes both. I learned that too late. Marcus absorbed this wisdom, thinking about his own life, his own choices. At 28, he was still finding his way, still figuring out what mattered most. Edward's story was a cautionary tale, a reminder that the decisions made in youth echo across entire lifetimes. "I never remarried after my wife died," Edward continued, his voice growing softer, more introspective. "People asked why, suggested dating services, introduced me to eligible widows. But I couldn't do it. It seemed dishonest somehow, to open my heart to someone new when it had never really closed to Sarah. My wife deserved better than what I gave her. She deserved to be loved completely, not to live in the shadow of my first love. She knew, I think. She never said anything, but she knew." The confession hung in the air, heavy with decades of accumulated guilt and sorrow. Marcus realized he was witnessing something profound, a man's final reckoning with his own life, the brutal honesty that comes when death removes the need for pretense or self-deception. "My children," Edward whispered. "They're good people, successful in their own ways. But I wasn't the father I should have been. I was present physically but absent emotionally, always holding something back. They felt it, even if they couldn't name it. My son once asked me why I seemed sad all the time, even when I was smiling. He was 10 years old. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that you're mourning a life you never lived, a love you threw away before he was even born?" Marcus squeezed Edward's hand gently, offering what comfort he could through simple human contact. "You're trying to make it right now," he said. "That counts for something." "Does it?" Edward's question was genuine, not rhetorical. "Or is it just selfishness on my part, seeking absolution at the end so I can die with a cleaner conscience? What does my apology do for Sarah, really? It might just reopen old wounds, force her to revisit pain she'd long since processed and moved past." "That's for her to decide," Marcus replied. "You're giving her the choice, the information, the acknowledgement that what happened between you mattered. Maybe she needs to hear it. Maybe she's carried her own regrets all these years. Or maybe she'll read the letter, feel nothing, and move on with her day. But at least she'll know that she was loved, that she wasn't forgotten, that the time you shared meant something lasting and real. Edward's eyes searched Marcus's face, looking for reassurance or perhaps just honest human connection in these final hours. "You're wise beyond your years," he said. "How did a young orderly come to understand so much about love and regret?" Marcus smiled sadly. "I don't understand much," he admitted. "But I've worked in this hospital for 3 years, spent countless nights with people at the end of their lives. I've heard a lot of deathbed confessions, a lot of final regrets. The ones that hurt people the most are always about love, the love they didn't express, the people they let go, the chances they didn't take. Nobody ever regrets working too little or not achieving enough professional success. It's always about relationships, about human connection, about the people who mattered." Edward nodded slowly, his eyes drifting closed again. "That's the truth nobody tells young people starting out. They say follow your dreams, work hard, build something great. But they don't say that none of it means anything if you're alone at the end, if the people who could have loved you are scattered to the winds because you chose ambition over presence." The morphine was pulling Edward towards sleep, his words becoming slower, more slurred. Marcus stayed by his bedside, maintaining the connection of their joined hands, bearing witness to this man's final reckoning with a life of success and loneliness. The letter to Sarah felt heavier in his pocket now, weighted with the responsibility of carrying one man's desperate hope across a continent to reach a woman who might or might not want to receive it. As Edward's breathing evened into the shallow rhythm of drugged sleep, Marcus carefully released his hand and stood up. He would mail the letter in the morning, as promised. Overnight delivery, the fastest possible service. And then he would wait and hope that Sarah Mitchell, somewhere in Boulder, Colorado, would choose to grant a dying man the gift of acknowledgement, if not forgiveness. Marcus stood in line at the post office the next morning, the letter to Sarah clutched in his hand like a sacred artifact. The overnight express envelope had cost $43, money he couldn't easily spare on his orderly's salary, but Edward's desperate situation made the expense irrelevant. Some things transcended financial considerations, and carrying a dying man's apology across the country was undoubtedly one of them. The postal clerk, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, processed the transaction with practiced efficiency. "Guaranteed delivery by noon tomorrow Mountain Time," she confirmed, affixing the tracking label and scanning it into the system. "You'll receive email updates on its progress." Marcus watched as the envelope disappeared into a bin behind the counter, beginning its journey to Boulder. The tracking number was already committed to memory. He would check it obsessively over the next 24 hours, following the letter's progress across state lines as it carried Edward's heart toward an uncertain reception. His phone buzzed as he left the post office. A text from the hospital. "Edward asking for you. Can you come in?" Marcus checked the time, 10:30 in the morning. He wasn't scheduled to work until that evening, but the message carried an urgency that transcended normal scheduling concerns. Traffic was heavy on the drive to St. Margaret's, testing Marcus's patience as he navigated construction zones and morning congestion. By the time he reached the hospital and made his way to room 347, nearly an hour had passed. He approached the door with mounting apprehension, fearing what he might find. Edward was awake, but looked markedly worse than the previous evening. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and the oxygen cannula in his nose had been upgraded to a more substantial mask. Additional monitors surrounded the bed, their displays showing vital signs that even Marcus's untrained eye could recognize as concerning. A nurse Marcus didn't know was adjusting the morphine drip, increasing the dosage. "He's been asking for you for the past 2 hours, the nurse said quietly as Marcus entered. "He's quite agitated, which isn't good for him in his condition. We've increased his pain medication, but he keeps fighting the sedation." Marcus moved to Edward's bedside, and the old man's eyes immediately locked onto his face with desperate intensity. Edward pulled the oxygen mask aside despite the nurse's protest. "Did you send it?" The words came out raspy and strained. "The letter, did you send it?" "Yes," Marcus assured him, gently helping to reposition the mask. "Just this morning. Overnight express. It will arrive in Boulder by noon tomorrow. Sarah will have it in her hands within 24 hours. Edward's body relaxed slightly against the pillows, some of the tension draining from his failing frame. "Good," he breathed. "Good. I needed to know. I needed to be sure." The nurse finished with the 4 and gave Marcus a meaningful look. "Try to keep him calm," she said softly. The more agitated he gets, the harder his heart has to work. She left the room, closing the door quietly behind her. Marcus settled into the chair beside the bed, maintaining his vigil. The hours passed slowly, marked by the steady beeping of monitors and Edward's labored breathing. Sometimes the old man slept, pulled under by the morphine. Other times he surfaced into consciousness, his eyes seeking Marcus's face for reassurance that he wasn't alone. "Tell me about yourself," Edward said during one of his wakeful periods, his voice muffled by the oxygen mask. "I've asked so much of you, but I know so little about who you are." Marcus was surprised by the question. In their intense focus on finding Sarah, they'd never really discussed anything personal beyond the task at hand. "There's not much to tell," he said with a self-deprecating shrug. "I'm 28, work as a night orderly, live alone in a studio apartment. Pretty unremarkable life, really." "Everyone's life is remarkable if you look closely enough," Edward insisted. "Why did you become an orderly? What drew you to hospital work?" Marcus considered the question, realizing he'd never articulated the answer, even to himself. "My mother was sick when I was in college," he said slowly. "Cancer. I spent a lot of time in hospitals during her treatment, watching the staff work. The doctors were impressive, sure, but it was the orderlies and nurses who really made a difference. The people who were there in the middle of the night, who held her hand during the scary moments, who treated her with dignity even when she was at her most vulnerable." He paused, the memory still painful even after several years. "She died my senior year. I dropped out, needed time to process. When I was ready to work again, this seemed like the right place to be." Edward studied Marcus's face with those perceptive eyes that illness hadn't dimmed. "You're honoring her memory by caring for others," he said. "That's not unremarkable at all. That's beautiful." The conversation drifted after that, Edward's consciousness waning as the medication pulled him back towards sleep. Marcus found himself checking his phone constantly, tracking the letter's progress through the overnight delivery system. By late afternoon, it had reached a sorting facility in Kansas City. By evening, it was in Denver. The physical distance between Edward's desperate hope and Sarah's unknowing presence was shrinking with each passing hour. Marcus's shift began at 11, and he moved through his duties with mechanical efficiency, his mind constantly returning to room 347 and the man waiting there. During his breaks, he returned to Edward's bedside, maintaining the silent vigil that had become his primary purpose. Around 3 in the morning, during one of these visits, Edward woke with unexpected clarity. The morphine fog seemed to have lifted temporarily, giving him a window of lucidity that Marcus instinctively recognized as precious and fleeting. "Marcus," Edward said, his voice stronger than it had been in hours, "I need to tell you something important. About Sarah, about us, about what really happened." Marcus leaned forward, giving Edward his full attention. The old man's eyes were distant, looking into a past that only he could see. "When I left for Baltimore, I told Sarah it was about my career, about building our future," Edward began. "That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. I was also running away from how much I loved her, from how terrified I was of that intensity of feeling." He paused, struggling for breath. "My parents had a terrible marriage. My father was devoted to my mother, completely consumed by his love for her. When she died suddenly when I was 15, he fell apart, lost his job, started drinking, became a shadow of himself. I watched that happen, watched how loving someone completely could destroy you if you lost them." The confession hung in the air, revealing layers of motivation that Edward had perhaps never fully acknowledged even to himself. "So when Johns Hopkins offered me that position, part of me saw it as an escape route. If I left, if I put physical distance between us, maybe the intensity would fade. Maybe I could love her from a safer distance, protect myself from the vulnerability of complete devotion." His voice cracked. "But it didn't work that way. The distance only made everything worse. I realized too late that I'd been running from the wrong thing. The fear of loss shouldn't have driven me away from love. It should have made me cherish every moment we had together." Marcus felt the weight of this revelation, understanding now that Edward's regret wasn't just about a career choice, but about a fundamental failure of courage, a decision made from fear rather than strength. "When I finally came back, when I tried to find her, I think part of me knew it was too late," Edward continued. "But I had to try. I searched for months, followed every lead. I talked to her former colleagues, her neighbors, anyone who might know where she'd gone. It was like she'd vanished completely, as if our entire relationship had been a dream." He closed his eyes, tears seeping beneath the lids. "Eventually, I had to accept that she didn't want to be found, at least not by me. So I stopped searching. I told myself I was respecting her wishes, but really, I was just a coward again. I was choosing to protect myself from rejection rather than risk everything to find her. The monitors beeped steadily, marking time, counting down moments that were rapidly running out. Marcus checked his phone again, 6 in the morning. The letter would be in Boulder in 6 hours. Would it be soon enough? Would Sarah respond? And if she did, would Edward still be alive to receive whatever message she sent? "I need you to promise me something else," Edward said, gripping Marcus's hand with surprising strength. "If Sarah doesn't respond in time, if I don't get to hear from her before I go, I need you to tell her something for me. Tell her that loving her was the best thing I ever did, even if I did it badly. Tell her that she deserved so much better than what I gave her. Tell her that I hope she found someone who loved her the way I should have, completely, courageously, without reservation." "I promise," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "But she's going to respond, Mr. Harrison. She's going to read your letter, and she's going to reach out. I feel it." Edward smiled weakly, wanting to believe but too familiar with disappointment to embrace hope fully. "You're a good man, Marcus-chan. Sarah would have liked you. She always had a soft spot for people who led with kindness." He paused, exhaustion overtaking him. "Will you stay? Just until the letter arrives? I don't want to be alone when the moment comes, whatever that moment brings." "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus assured him. "I'll be right here, however long it takes." As dawn light began filtering through the hospital room window, casting long shadows across the floor, Marcus settled deeper into his chair. The letter was somewhere over the Rocky Mountains now, making its final approach to Boulder. In a few hours, it would reach Sarah Mitchell's mailbox, and a message 47 years in the making would finally be delivered. Marcus found himself praying, despite not being particularly religious, that Sarah would open her mailbox today, that she would read the letter immediately, that she would feel moved to respond. Edward Harrison deserved that much, not forgiveness necessarily, but acknowledgement. He deserved to know that his love, however imperfectly expressed, had mattered to someone. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, and Edward slept fitfully, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths. Marcus watched the old man's face, seeing past the illness to the young doctor who had fallen so completely in love, who had made mistakes and carried their weight for nearly 5 decades. Whatever happened in the next few hours, Marcus had given Edward something invaluable: hope, effort, and the knowledge that someone cared enough to try. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, painting the hospital room in shades of gold and amber. Marcus had barely moved from his chair, his body stiff and aching from hours of maintaining vigil. Edward drifted in and out of consciousness, each period of wakefulness shorter and more labored than the last. The medical staff came and went with increasing frequency, their expressions professional, but their eyes conveying what words didn't need to. Time was running out. Marcus's phone showed 11:15. Mountain time meant it was 9:15 in Boulder. The letter had been marked as out for delivery at 7 that morning. Somewhere in Colorado, a postal worker was making their rounds, carrying Edward's 47-year-old apology among bills and catalogs and advertising circulars. The mundane mixing with the profound, as it always did in life's most significant moments. Noon arrived with agonizing slowness. Marcus refreshed the tracking page obsessively, watching for the status to change from out for delivery to delivered. 12:15, 12:30. Each minute felt like an hour, each hour like an eternity. Edward stirred occasionally, his eyes opening just long enough to seek Marcus's face, to confirm he wasn't alone, before the morphine pulled him back under. At 12:47, Marcus's phone buzzed with an update. Package delivered. Signed by S. Mitchell. His heart leapt into his throat. She had the letter. Right now, at this very moment, Sarah Mitchell was presumably holding the envelope, perhaps opening it, reading the words Marcus had so carefully crafted on Edward's behalf. "Mr. Harrison," Marcus said softly, leaning close. The letter was delivered. "She has it now." Edward's eyes opened, struggling to focus. "She has it," he repeated, the words barely audible through the oxygen mask. "Now we wait." The waiting was excruciating. Marcus knew it was unreasonable to expect an immediate response. Sarah would need time to process, to decide how she felt, to determine if and how she wanted to reply. But rationality held little sway against the desperate hope that pulsed through the hospital room, against the ticking clock of Edward's failing body. 1 o'clock passed. Then 2. Edward's breathing grew more shallow, more labored. The nurse came in to increase the morphine again, her face grave as she checked his vitals. His blood pressure is dropping, she told Marcus quietly. It could be hours or it could be minutes. There's no way to know. Marcus nodded, his throat too tight for words. He returned to his chair, taking Edward's cold hand in his own, willing the old man to hold on just a little longer. Just long enough for Sarah to respond, to grant him the closure he'd sought for 47 years. At 2:30, Marcus's phone rang. The sound was so unexpected, so jarring in the hushed atmosphere of the hospital room, that he nearly dropped the device in his haste to answer. An unknown number with a Colorado area code flashed on the screen. His hands trembled as he accepted the call. "Hello?" His voice came out strained, barely above a whisper. "Is this Marcus Chin?" The voice on the other end was female, older, with a slight tremor that suggested emotion barely held in check. "Yes, this is Marcus." A pause, filled with the weight of decades. "This is Sarah Mitchell. I received your letter about Edward Harrison." Marcus's eyes flew to Edward's face. The old man was watching him with sudden alertness, as if he'd sensed the importance of this moment even through the fog of medication. Marcus put the phone on speaker, holding it between them so Edward could hear. "Ms. Mitchell," Marcus said carefully. "Thank you for calling. I know this must be. Is he really dying?" Sarah interrupted, her voice cracking slightly. "Your letter said he doesn't have much time. Is that true, or was it a manipulation to make me respond?" The directness of the question, the underlying pain in her voice, told Marcus everything he needed to know about what Edward's departure had cost her. "It's true," he said gently. "He has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him days, maybe hours. He's here with me now. He can hear you." The silence that followed was profound, stretching across the miles between Philadelphia and Boulder, across 47 years of absence and regret. Marcus could hear Sarah's breathing on the other end, quick and unsteady, the sound of someone trying to maintain composure against overwhelming emotion. "Edward," Sarah's voice was barely audible. "Is it really you?" Edward's hand gripped Marcus's with desperate strength. He pulled the oxygen mask aside, ignoring Marcus's protest, needing to speak directly. "Sarah," he breathed. "Sarah, it's me. I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry." Another silence, and then Sarah spoke again, her voice thick with tears. "I read your letter 3 times. I've been sitting here at my kitchen table for the past hour, just staring at your words, trying to process what I'm feeling." She paused, and Marcus could hear her take a shaky breath. "I thought I was over you, Edward. I thought I'd dealt with all of this decades ago. But reading that letter, it's like I'm 23 again, standing in my apartment, waiting for a phone call that never came." "I know," Edward said, his voice breaking. "I know I hurt you. I was a fool, Sarah. A coward. I chose everything wrong, and I've regretted it every day since. Why didn't you fight for me?" The question erupted from Sarah with raw pain, years of wondering finally finding voice. "If you loved me the way you claimed, why did you just leave? Why didn't you stay, or ask me to come with you, or find some compromise? You just left, like I didn't matter enough to even have the conversation." Edward's face contorted with anguish. "I was terrified," he confessed. "Terrified of how much I loved you, of how vulnerable that made me. My father fell apart when my mother died, and I saw what complete devotion could do to a person. I thought if I maintained some distance, some independence, I could protect myself." He coughed, struggling for breath. "But I was wrong about everything. The fear of losing you drove me to lose you anyway. The irony isn't lost on me." Marcus watched tears stream down Edward's face, decades of suppressed grief finally breaking through. The monitors beeped faster, responding to his emotional state, and Marcus gently repositioned the oxygen mask, worried about the strain on Edward's failing heart. "I tried to find you," Edward continued, his words muffled by the mask. "When I came back, when I realized what I'd done, I searched everywhere. But you were gone." "I moved to Harrisburg," Sarah said, her voice softening slightly. "I couldn't stay in Philadelphia. Everything reminded me of you, the hospital, the streets we'd walked together, the restaurant where you'd promised me forever. I needed a fresh start, somewhere without ghosts." She paused. "I never married, Edward. I dated, had relationships, but I could never fully commit. Some therapist once told me I had abandonment issues. I suppose she was right." The revelation hit Edward like a physical blow. His eyes closed, fresh tears squeezing out. "I married," he admitted. "But I was a terrible husband. My wife deserved better. She deserved someone who could love her completely. not someone carrying a torch for a lost love. She knew. She never said it directly, but she knew she was second choice. "We both paid for your decision," Sarah said quietly. "We both built half-lives, always wondering what might have been." "I know," Edward whispered, "and I'm sorrier than words can express. I robbed us both of the life we could have had together. I can't take it back, can't undo the damage. I can only tell you that you were loved, Sarah. Deeply, completely, even if I showed it badly. You were the love of my life." The silence that followed felt different, less charged with anger, more weighted with shared sorrow for time that could never be reclaimed. Marcus found himself crying quietly, overwhelmed by the tragedy of two people who had loved each other, but had been separated by fear and pride and the cruel mathematics of time. "I forgive you, Edward." Sarah's words came softly but clearly, each syllable deliberate. "I don't know if I can forget, and I don't know if things would have worked out even if you'd stayed. Maybe we were always meant to be a beautiful beginning that never found its ending. But I forgive you. I forgive you for leaving, for hurting me, for all the years we lost. You were young, scared, and human. We all make mistakes." Edward's body shook with silent sobs, the oxygen mask fogging with his breath. "Thank you," he managed. "Thank you, Sarah. That's more than I deserved, more than I hoped for." "I need you to know something too," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. "Despite everything, despite the pain, I'm glad we had what we had. Those months together were some of the happiest of my life. You made me feel seen, valued, loved in a way I'd never experienced before. What came after doesn't erase what came before. The love was real, Edward. That part was real." "It was real," Edward echoed. "It was the realest thing in my life." They talked for another 20 minutes, sharing abbreviated versions of the lives they'd lived apart. Sarah told him about her work in pediatrics, about the children she'd helped, about moving to Boulder and finding peace in the mountains. Edward told her about his career, his children, his wife's death, his gradual understanding that professional success meant nothing without personal connection. Finally, Sarah's voice grew thick with emotion. "I should let you rest. You need to conserve your strength." "Sarah," Edward said urgently, as if sensing this might be his last chance. "Thank you for this gift. Thank you for calling, for listening, for forgiving. You've given me peace I didn't think possible." "Take care of yourself, Edward," Sarah said softly. "And thank you for loving me, even imperfectly. It mattered. You mattered." "You mattered too," Edward whispered. "You always mattered. Goodbye, Sarah." "Goodbye, Edward." The line went dead. Marcus gently set the phone down, looking at Edward's face. The old man's eyes were closed, but his expression had transformed. The tension that had been present since Marcus first met him was gone, replaced by something that looked remarkably like peace. His breathing was shallow but steady, his body finally relaxed against the pillows. "She forgave me," Edward murmured, almost to himself. "After everything, she forgave me." Marcus squeezed his hand gently. "Yes, she did." Edward opened his eyes one last time, meeting Marcus's gaze. "Thank you, Marcus. For everything. For caring, for searching, for making this possible. You gave me something precious. You gave me closure." "Rest now," Marcus said softly. "You can rest now." Edward smiled, a genuine expression of contentment that seemed to erase years from his worn face. His eyes drifted closed, and his breathing began to slow. The monitors registered the changes, blood pressure dropping, heart rate declining, oxygen saturation falling. But Edward Harrison, in his final moments, was finally at peace. The afternoon light shifted subtly as it poured through the hospital room window, casting elongated shadows that crept slowly across the sterile floor. Marcus remained motionless in his chair, Edward's frail hand still clasped in his own, bearing witness to the final chapter of a life defined by brilliance, regret, and ultimately redemption. The conversation with Sarah had fundamentally altered something in Edward. It was visible in the relaxation of muscles that had been tense for decades, in the softening of features that had carried the weight of unforgiven mistakes. Edward's breathing had settled into a new rhythm, slower and more deliberate, each inhalation requiring conscious effort, each exhalation releasing not just air but something deeper, the accumulated burden of 47 years. The monitors tracked his decline with clinical precision, numbers dropping steadily as his body began its final shutdown. Heart rate 62, then 58, then 53. Blood pressure falling in parallel, the life force that had sustained him for 75 years gradually ebbing away. Marcus found himself thinking about the nature of closure, about how much power it held even in the face of death. Edward had lived nearly 5 decades carrying the weight of his mistake, building a successful career and raising a family, all while a part of his heart remained forever trapped in 1978, in a moment of choice that he could never undo. And yet, in his final hours, a simple phone call had transformed everything. Sarah's forgiveness hadn't changed the past, hadn't erased the pain or restored the lost years, but it had given Edward permission to let go, to release his grip on regret and embrace whatever came next. "Mr. Harrison," Marcus said softly, leaning closer. "Can you hear me?" Edward's eyelids fluttered, but didn't fully open. His lips moved slightly beneath the oxygen mask, forming words that had no voice behind them. Marcus carefully adjusted the mask, wanting to catch whatever Edward might be trying to communicate. "Sarah," Edward breathed, the single word carrying volumes of meaning. Not a question, not a plea, just an acknowledgement, a celebration of her existence and the connection they'd shared across time and distance. "She called," Marcus reminded him gently. "She forgave you. She said the love was real." A tear slipped from the corner of Edward's closed eye, tracing a path down his weathered cheek. His hand tightened almost imperceptibly around Marcus's, a gesture of gratitude or perhaps simply human connection in the face of the great unknown. The monitors continued their steady descent, heart rate 49, blood pressure barely registering, oxygen saturation dropping into concerning territory. The door opened quietly, and a nurse entered, the same woman who had been monitoring Edward throughout the day. Her name tag read Jennifer, and her eyes held the particular combination of compassion and professional detachment that came from years of witnessing death. She checked the monitors, her expression confirming what Marcus already knew. They were in the final stages now, minutes rather than hours. "Does he have any family we should call?" Jennifer asked softly, her hand resting briefly on Marcus's shoulder. "Children, siblings, anyone who should be here?" Marcus shook his head. "His children are scattered across the country. By the time they got here," he didn't need to finish the sentence. Jennifer nodded, understanding immediately. "Then it's good he has you," she said, her voice warm with approval. "Nobody should die alone." She made a few adjustments to the morphine drip, ensuring Edward's comfort, then quietly withdrew, leaving Marcus alone with the dying man once more. The room fell back into hushed stillness, broken only by the soft beeping of monitors and Edward's increasingly labored breathing. Marcus thought about his own mother's death, about those final hours in a hospital room, not unlike this one. He'd been 21, terrified and unprepared for the enormity of what was happening. His mother had been unconscious by the end, the cancer having ravaged her body until there was nothing left but the shell of the vibrant woman she'd once been. He'd sat beside her bed much as he sat beside Edward's now, holding her hand, telling her it was okay to let go, that he would be all right. He'd lied, of course. He hadn't been all right for a long time after. But grief had its own timeline, its own process of healing, and eventually he'd found his way back to something resembling normalcy. That experience had led him here, to this work, to this moment. His mother's death had taught him about the sacred nature of endings, about the importance of presence and witness. Every patient he'd sat with since, every hand he'd held, every final breath he'd witnessed, all of it was, in some way, an honoring of his mother's memory and a fulfillment of the promise he'd made to himself in her final hours. No one should die alone. No one should make that final passage without someone to acknowledge their humanity, their worth, the fact that they had lived and mattered. "You know what's funny?" Marcus said, speaking partly to Edward and partly to himself, needing to fill the silence with something other than the sound of dying. "I thought this job would be depressing, being around death all the time. But it's not really. It's taught me more about life than anything else ever could. It's taught me that nothing matters more than the people we love, the connections we make, the courage to be vulnerable with someone else." Edward's breathing stuttered, caught, then resumed in a shallower pattern. His face had taken on an almost translucent quality, as if he were already becoming something less solid, less tethered to the physical world. The afternoon sun streaming through the window seemed to pass through him rather than illuminate him, creating an effect that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. "Your story with Sarah," Marcus continued, his voice growing thick with emotion. "It's going to stay with me. It's going to change how I think about love, about choices, about what really matters. You gave her 47 years of regret, but in the end, you also gave her the truth. That counts for something. That means something." The monitors showed heart rate 37, blood pressure barely measurable, oxygen saturation in the low 70s and falling. Edward's chest rose and fell with increasing difficulty, his body fighting for each breath even as his consciousness had retreated to some place beyond reach. Marcus found himself silently willing the old man to hold on, to take just a few more breaths, to exist in this world for just a few more precious moments. But he also knew that holding on was selfish, that Edward had earned his rest, his release from the body that had become more prison than vessel. "It's okay," Marcus whispered, leaning very close, his lips nearly touching Edward's ear. "You can go now. Sarah forgave you. You made your peace. It's okay to let go." As if waiting for permission, as if those words were what he needed to hear, Edward's breathing changed. The pattern became irregular, with long pauses between each inhalation. Shane Stokes' respiration, Marcus recognized, the body's final rhythm before cessation. He tightened his grip on Edward's hand, wanting the old man to feel human touch, human warmth, human love in these ultimate moments. "You were brave in the end," Marcus said, tears streaming freely down his face now. "You faced your mistakes, sought forgiveness, found peace. That takes tremendous courage. I hope you know that. I hope wherever you're going, you carry that knowledge with you." Edward's chest rose one more time, held for a moment suspended in time, then fell and did not rise again. The monitors began their urgent alarming, flat lines replacing the wavy patterns of life. But Marcus knew there was no need for intervention, no code to call, no attempt at resuscitation to make. This was the natural end of a natural process, death arriving precisely when it should, after a life fully lived if not always perfectly. Jennifer entered quickly, drawn by the alarms, and silenced them with practiced efficiency. She checked for a pulse, for any signs of life, then looked at the clock on the wall. "Time of death, 3:47 p.m., she said softly, her voice carrying the ritualized weight of official pronouncement. Marcus nodded but didn't release Edward's hand, not yet. He sat for several more minutes, honoring the transition, acknowledging the profound shift that had just occurred. A man who had existed for 75 years, who had contained multitudes of experiences and emotions and memories, had ceased to be. Edward Harrison was gone, leaving behind only the physical shell he'd inhabited and the ripples his existence had created in the lives of others. Finally, gently, Marcus released Edward's hand and arranged it carefully on the bed. He stood, his body stiff from hours of sitting, and looked down at the old man's face. Death had smoothed away the lines of pain and worry, leaving behind an expression of profound peace. Edward looked younger somehow, as if the release from regret had lifted decades from his features. "Goodbye, Mr. Harrison," Marcus said quietly. "Thank you for trusting me with your story. Thank you for teaching me something important about love and courage and the power of seeking forgiveness, even when it seems too late." Jennifer had begun the necessary post-death procedures, documenting the time, preparing paperwork, treating the body with the efficient respect that was her professional obligation. Marcus watched for a moment, then quietly left the room, unable to witness the reduction of a human being to mere administrative tasks and physical remains. In the hallway, Marcus leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. The emotional intensity of the past few days caught up with him all at once. The desperate search for Sarah, the vigil at Edward's bedside, the profound phone call that had granted absolution, and finally, the sacred act of witnessing death. He felt hollowed out, emptied of everything except a strange mixture of grief and gratitude. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Marcus pulled it out, seeing another Colorado number on the screen. He answered, his voice hoarse. "Hello, Marcus?" It was Sarah, her voice tentative. "I've been thinking about Edward all afternoon. How is he? I know I said goodbye, but I couldn't stop worrying. Is he still?" Marcus closed his eyes, fresh tears forming. "He passed away about 10 minutes ago," he said gently. "Peacefully. Your conversation this afternoon. It gave him exactly what he needed. He was at peace when he went." A soft sob came through the phone, the sound of grief mixing with relief. "I'm glad," Sarah said through her tears. "I'm glad he didn't die carrying that weight. I'm glad I could give him that, even though it cost me something to do it." "It was a generous gift," Marcus said. "The most generous gift anyone could give." They talked for a few more minutes, Sarah asking about Edward's final hours, Marcus describing the peace that had settled over him after their conversation. Finally, Sarah said something that would stay with Marcus for the rest of his life. "You know what I've realized today," she said. "Forgiveness isn't really for the person who hurt you. It's for yourself. I thought I'd dealt with Edward's abandonment decades ago, but I was just suppressing it, building walls around it. Today, by forgiving him, I finally let it go. I freed myself from carrying it anymore, So in a strange way, he gave me a gift too. He gave me the opportunity to finally heal. Marcus smiled through his tears. He would have been glad to know that. After ending the call, Marcus remained in the hallway for a long time, processing everything that had happened. A simple request from a dying man had set in motion a chain of events that had touched multiple lives, healing old wounds and teaching profound lessons about the nature of love, regret, and redemption. Edward Harrison's story was finished, but its impact would continue, rippling outward in ways both seen and unseen. 3 days after Edward Harrison's death, Marcus found himself standing in the modest chapel of Greenwood Memorial Park, a funeral home on the outskirts of Philadelphia. The service had been sparsely attended. Edward's 2 children, both middle-aged professionals who had flown in from California and Texas respectively, a handful of former colleagues from his medical career, and Marcus himself, there not as hospital staff but as something more personal, something harder to define. The chapel was decorated with understated elegance, pale wood paneling and soft lighting creating an atmosphere of quiet contemplation. A closed casket stood at the front, covered with a spray of white lilies and roses. Next to it, a poster board displayed photographs from Edward's life. Young doctor in surgical scrubs, proud father holding newborn babies, older man receiving medical awards, grandfather smiling with young children. An entire life reduced to a collection of frozen moments, each one telling a story that Marcus now understood was incomplete, missing the ghost of Sarah Mitchell that had haunted every frame. Edward's daughter, Catherine, had approached Marcus before the service began. She was in her early 40s, with her father's intelligent eyes and a carefully maintained composure that suggested years of practice at keeping emotions at bay. "You're Marcus Chin?" she'd asked, extending her hand. "The orderly from St. Margaret's?" Marcus had nodded, accepting the handshake. "I am. I'm very sorry for your loss." Catherine's expression had shifted, something unreadable flickering across her features. "My father's attorney gave me a letter he'd written, to be opened after his death. It mentioned you by name, thanked you for something he called an invaluable service. He didn't specify what, just said you'd understand." She paused, studying Marcus's face with the same perceptive intensity her father had possessed. "What did you do for him? In his final days, what was so important?" Marcus had hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. Edward's quest to find Sarah, his decades of regret, the deathbed reconciliation, these were deeply personal matters, perhaps not meant for children who'd lived their entire lives in the shadow of their father's hidden grief. But looking at Catherine's face, seeing the need for understanding there, Marcus made a decision. "Your father asked me to help him find someone from his past," Marcus said carefully. "Someone he'd loved and lost many years ago, before he met your mother. He wanted to apologize, to make amends before he died. I was able to locate her, and they spoke on the phone hours before he passed." Catherine's eyes widened, a complex cascade of emotions crossing her face: shock, hurt, understanding, and something that might have been relief. "Sarah," she whispered. "He wanted to find Sarah." Now it was Marcus's turn to be surprised. "You knew about her?" "Not the details, not her name until recently," Catherine admitted, her voice dropping lower. "But I always knew there was someone. Some woman from his past who he'd never really let go of. I could see it in the way he'd sometimes stare off into space, this profound sadness in his eyes. My mother knew too. She never said anything directly, but there were hints, careful comments. 'Your father's heart is a complicated place,' she'd tell me once. 'He loves us, but there's a room he keeps locked that we're not allowed to enter.' The revelation hung between them, a shared acknowledgement of the secret that had shaped their family in ways they were only now beginning to understand. Catherine blinked back tears, her composure cracking slightly. "Was he happy?" she asked suddenly. "When he spoke to her in those final hours, was he finally happy?" Marcus thought about Edward's face after the phone call with Sarah, the peace that had settled over him, the transformation from a man carrying unbearable weight to someone finally free. "Yes," he said with conviction. He was at peace. She forgave him, told him their love had been real. It gave him something he'd been searching for his entire adult life. Catherine nodded slowly, processing this information. "Good," she said finally. "I'm glad. I spent my whole childhood trying to make my father smile genuinely, trying to reach that locked room inside him. I always failed. If this woman, if Sarah, could give him that peace at the end, then I'm grateful to her. And to you for making it possible." The service itself was brief and conventional, a minister who'd never known Edward reading generic words about life and death and eternal rest. Edward's son, David, gave a short eulogy focusing on his father's medical career, his dedication to his patients, his contributions to cardiac surgery. It was respectful and well-crafted but somehow hollow, dancing around the essential truth of who Edward Harrison had been. A brilliant man haunted by a single mistake, a loving father incapable of giving himself fully, a husband who'd married with half a heart. Marcus sat in the back row, listening to the sanitized version of Edward's life being presented to the small gathering. He thought about how different the eulogy might have been if it told the whole truth, about young love and ambition, about choices made in fear, about 47 years of regret and the redemption found in final moments. That was the real story, the one that mattered, but it wasn't the kind of story that got told at funerals. People preferred their dead uncomplicated, their legacies neat and tidy. After the service, as people filed out toward the cemetery for the burial, Marcus felt his phone vibrate. He stepped aside, checking the screen. Another Colorado number. Sarah. Hello. Marcus answered, moving to a quiet corner of the chapel. Marcus, it's Sarah Mitchell. Her voice sounded stronger than it had during their previous conversations, though still carrying an undercurrent of emotion. I hope I'm not disturbing you. I wanted to check if Edward's funeral was today. I've been thinking about it all morning. It is, Marcus confirmed. The service just ended. We're about to head to the cemetery. A long pause, filled with the sound of Sarah's breathing and something else, perhaps wind, perhaps the rustle of movement. I wish I could have been there, she said finally. Not for me really, but for him. He deserved to have someone there who knew the whole story, who understood who he really was beneath the successful surgeon persona. His daughter knows, Marcus said. At least some of it. She knew about you, even if she didn't know the details. I think it helps her make sense of her father, to understand why he was the way he was. Good, Sarah said softly. Children deserve to understand their parents as complete human beings, not just as the roles they play. We're all more complicated than we appear. She paused again, and Marcus could hear paper rustling. I've been writing something. A letter to Edward's children, if they want it. Explaining what their father and I meant to each other, what happened between us, why their father carried that grief for so long. I thought it might give them context, help them see their family history more clearly. Marcus felt a swell of emotion at the generosity of this gesture. Sarah owed Edward's children nothing, yet she was offering them something precious, perspective, understanding, the missing piece of their father's puzzle. I think they'd appreciate that very much, he said. Can I give them your contact information? Yes, please do. And Marcus? Sarah's voice grew even softer. Thank you for everything you did. You gave an old man peace in his final hours, and you gave me the chance to finally let go of pain I'd been carrying for far too long. That's no small thing. They spoke for a few more minutes, Sarah sharing memories of the Edward she'd known in 1978, brilliant, passionate, full of dreams and insecurities in equal measure. It was a version of Edward that his children had never known. The young man before disappointment and regret had hardened him into something more guarded and distant. After ending the call, Marcus joined the procession to the cemetery, a small group walking through manicured grounds dotted with headstones and monuments. Edward's final resting place was in a newer section, under a large oak tree that provided dappled shade. The grave had been prepared, dark earth piled beside the rectangular opening, waiting to receive Edward's casket. The burial service was even briefer than the chapel ceremony. The minister spoke about dust and ashes, about eternal rest and heavenly reward. Edward's casket was lowered into the ground with mechanical precision, cables and pulleys doing work that gravity would have accomplished given time. Catherine and David each threw a handful of earth onto the casket, the sound of dirt hitting wood carrying a finality that words couldn't match. As the small gathering began to disperse, Catherine approached Marcus again. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry, her composure firmly back in place. Will you tell me about her? She asked. About Sarah? I need to understand what my father spent his whole life mourning. Marcus nodded, gesturing toward a nearby bench. They sat together, and he told her everything, about Edward's quest to find Sarah, about Marcus's search across decades and state lines, about the phone call that had brought closure to a love story 47 years in the making. Catherine listened intently, occasionally asking questions, her face reflecting a complex mixture of emotions as she learned about the ghost who had haunted her childhood home. It explains so much, she said when Marcus finished. Why he could never fully relax, why there was always this sadness behind his eyes even during happy moments. He was living a half-life, going through the motions while the best part of him remained trapped in 1978. She looked at Marcus directly. Did Sarah love him back? Or was this all one-sided, my father pining for someone who'd moved on? She loved him, Marcus said with certainty. She never married either. Never could fully commit to anyone else, because a part of her was still waiting for him to come back, to choose her. They both paid the price for his mistake. Catherine nodded slowly, absorbing this. Two lives shaped by one moment, one choice made in fear instead of love. She stood, smoothing her black dress. I'm glad they got to speak at the end. I'm glad he found some peace. And I'm grateful to you, Marcus, for caring enough about a dying man's request to make it happen. Most people wouldn't have bothered. She handed Marcus a business card with her contact information, along with Sarah's letter when it arrived. They shook hands, and Catherine rejoined her brother, leaving Marcus alone by Edward's grave. Marcus stood there for a long time after everyone else had gone, watching the groundskeepers begin filling in the grave, returning earth to earth. He thought about love and regret, about the choices that define lives and the courage it takes to seek forgiveness. Edward Harrison's story was finished now, his remains returning to the soil while his spirit, whatever that meant, had moved on to whatever came next. But the story's impact continued. Sarah had found final closure, releasing pain she'd carried for decades. Catherine and David had gained understanding of their father's complexity, context for the emotional distance that had defined their childhoods. And Marcus himself had learned something profound about the nature of human connection, about how love could persist across decades and distances, how forgiveness could heal even the deepest wounds. As Marcus finally walked away from the grave, heading back toward his car and the rest of his life, he carried with him the weight of what he'd witnessed. Edward and Sarah's story would stay with him, informing his choices, reminding him that life was too short for fear to dictate decisions, that love deserved courage and presence and the willingness to be vulnerable. The afternoon sun was warm on his face as he drove away from the cemetery, leaving Edward Harrison to his eternal rest beneath the oak tree, finally free from the regret that had defined him, finally at peace with the choices he'd made and the love he'd lost and found again in his final hours. Edward Harrison spent 47 years carrying the weight of a single choice made in fear rather than love. His story reminds us that the decisions we make in our youth echo across entire lifetimes, shaping not just our own paths, but the lives of everyone we touch. In his final hours, he found the courage to seek forgiveness, and Sarah found the strength to grant it. Both of them were freed, not from the past itself, but from the burden of carrying it unresolved. This is the profound truth about forgiveness. It isn't really for the person who hurt us. It's for ourselves, a way of releasing the chains we've been dragging behind us for far too long. What would you have done in Edward's place? Would you have had the courage to search for a lost love, knowing you might face rejection or indifference? And if you were Sarah, could you forgive someone who abandoned you decades ago, or would the wounds still be too raw? These are the questions that define us as human beings, not whether we make mistakes, because we all do, but whether we have the courage to face them, to seek reconciliation, and to choose love over pride even when it costs us everything. Marcus Chen understood something profound, that bearing witness to someone's final act of courage, helping them find peace before the end, is one of the most sacred things we can do for another human being. If this story moved you, please follow our channel for more narratives that explore the depths of human emotion and resilience. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and leave a comment telling us your thoughts. Where are you watching from, and what would you have done in their situation? We read every comment and love connecting with our community.